Sure.
Hello, good morning, dear colleagues and history enthusiasts. It is with great pleasure that we have gathered today to present a remarkable book, Look Wadding, the Irish Franciscans and Global Catholicism, edited by Matteo Binasco. This book is part of our series, Routledge Early Modern Iberian History in Global Context Connections, which aim to make the best scholarly work on early modern Iberian history accessible to Anglophone readers. Our contributors offer original research, introduce new methods and approaches, and situate Iberian history in comparative and global perspectives. Our series aims to connect discipline and build bridges between national and transnational research cultures. It acknowledges the complex relationship, contrasts, tensions, and conflicts that characterize early modern Iberian history. Our collection, Connections, is a place where the many and diverse voices of the Iberian past can be heard. Allow me also first to introduce our editorial team for the series Early Modern Iberian History in Global Context. First, we have Pedro Cardim, who is the co-editor of Early Modern Iberian History in Global Context. He is associated with the Department of History and CHAM, Center for Humanities, at the Faculty of Social and Human Sciences and the New University of Lisbon. His expertise lies in the Iberian empires, political cultures, colonial Brazil, and early modern legal history. Also, the other co-editor of our series, who unfortunately couldn't participate today, is Harald Braun, who also serves as the co-editor of the Early Modern Iberian History in Global Contexts. Harald is affiliated with the Department of History at the School of Histories, Languages and Cultures at the University of Liverpool. His research interests encompass Iberian empires, Catholic political cultures, the history of violence, and the second scholastic. Completing our team is me, Agata Bloch, digital editor for the Early Modern Iberian History in Global Contexts. I am affiliated with the Tadeusz Manteuffel Institute of History at the Polish Academy of Sciences, and my research focuses on the Portuguese colonial empire, subaltern studies, historical network research, and digital history. You can also find us on our Facebook and website, and always you should look for Iberian Connections. And let me introduce our author, Matteo Binasco. Matteo Binasco is an assistant professor at the Università per gli Stranieri di Siena, Italy, and was a research fellow at the Istituto di Storia dell'Europa Mediterranea of Italy's Consiglio Nazionale delle Ricerche, and a postdoctoral research fellow at Cushwa Center for the Study of American Catholicism of the University of Notre Dame. He has edited Luca Condignola, Little Do We Know, History and Historians of the North Atlantic. He also authored Roman sources for the history of American Catholicism and Rome and Irish Catholicism in the Atlantic world. Today we gathered to talk about and discuss about his book, Look Wadding, the Irish Franciscan and Global Catholicism. And this book takes us on an extraordinary journey through the life and achievements of Luke Wadding, an influential Irishman who left a huge mark on early modern Ireland at the heart of the Catholicism in Rome. As we delve into the captivating pages of this book, we are accompanied by an assembly of international scholars who offer their expertise and insights, shedding light on Wadding's polycentric activities and illuminating his rise to prominence as one of the most important Franciscans in Rome. The story begins in Ireland, a country plagued by political and religious wars during the 17th century. Wadding embarked on a transformative journey that takes him from his homeland to Portugal, then to Spain, where he becomes fully immersed in the Baroque Catholic orthodoxy of the Spanish monarchy. Finally, he finds himself in Rome, where he would remain until his death, leaving a huge legacy. Through the collective analysis of international scholars, the book highlights the complexity and uniqueness of Wadding, showcasing his adaptability to the context of Rome characterized by papal autocracy, nepotism, and the height of Spanish influence. The chapters within the book explore the wide array of Wadding's activities, accomplishments, and roles, emphasizing his capacity to establish and develop networks according to various contexts in which he lived. As also Matteo Binasco mentioned in our blog, this book lifts the veil on the influential Irishman of the 17th century, showcasing his outstanding capacity to operate in transnational context. So now I would like to invite Matteo Binasco to provide us with a brief introduction to the book we are discussing today. So please, Matteo, thank you very much.
Thank you, Agatha. Thank you, Pedro. And I also would like to thank, Arad, who is not here, but I know he did so much to help me in publishing the book, and also all the people who are listening to our recording. I think, being the editor, it's nice to maybe to come back why I got this idea of writing this book and how it came, over the course of a year. And I think it started when I was doing my PhD, which was on the Irish clerical connection between Ireland, Rome, and the West Indies. And each time when I was going to the Roman archives, especially the Vatican archives, the archives of Propaganda Fide, but also another religious archives, the Franciscan order, I always came up with this name of this Irish Franciscan man, Duke Wadding, Luca Bodigo. I mean, we found different versions of his name. And I started investigating about, how much has been written. And I was quite surprised, that there was not so much as being done. It seems quite, a neglected figure. So I began to look at the bibliography, and I found out that there was a volume which was published in 1957, which if I'm not wrong, which was made by the Irish Franciscan. An excellent book and still a good reference point, but it was really written by Irish Franciscan. That means that it was really, there was a sort of apologetical literature, and there was not a lay perspective. And it's nice, or it's quite, weird to note that between this book and nowadays, before my book, nothing has been published. I was trying to look for some articles, some biographical voice, and it was missing, which is quite strange because if you consider that what has been done in the last 25 years, especially when we deal about Irish migration to continental Europe during the 16th and 17th century, we have like a lot of research is being done on the Irish in France, on the Irish in Spain, on the Irish in Portugal. I'm just quoting the work of Thomas O'Connor, Leon Chambers, Igor Perez Tostado, that everybody knows. Coming to Rome, it seems there is a gap. Everybody is quoting this man, but it was not a collective work updated. So I began to think, why not gather a collection of edited collection and written by scholars in different fields? Because I think when you analyze Wadding, the worst problem is to know how much, is complex figure. The first one problem is the question of his identity. He was an Irishman. He left Ireland when he was young. He spent a good part of his life in the Iberian Peninsula, Portugal first and then Spain. And the majority of his life, he went to Rome where he died. So it was quite a problem to balance how we do with this kind of question of identity, where he came from, how he was seen, an Irishman in exile, a Spanish man, a Roman man, a man who spent basically, all the best of his career in Rome. And another point, which was to be connected to his identity, how was wide his network? Basically, one of the things that strikes me when I keep on reading about Wadding is how much he was good in establishing relation with member of the papal curia, relation with the ambassador, relation with the king. So it was quite an impressive character. And once again, it was a problem because when you try to put together an edited collection like this one, the question was to be, how do you organize the collection? And how do you see Wadding life, through a religious perspective, through a scholarly perspective, because you have to remember that Luke Wadding was the chief compiler of the Annales Minorum, which was the first Franciscan order written by a member of the order since the beginning. So a huge task. How do we see Wadding according to the political lens? He was a very prominent diplomat in Spain, but especially when he came to Rome, because he supported the cause of his native country, Ireland. How do we see him as a hard patron? So the question was, there was many problems in trying to analyze this figure. So I decided to contact a group of scholars, and we tried to organize the book according to four different areas. I mean, the first one was Wadding and the Iberian Peninsula. So basically trying to highlight how Wadding acted and lived in the Iberian Peninsula and how he tried to adapt to a Spanish context. Then we moved to the second part of the book about Wadding and the Roman context. So how he adapted to Rome, how good he was able to build relationship with the Pope, with the cardinals, and the various members of the Papal Curia. And also an important section was how basically Wadding was very important for the scholarly production. We have to think that St. Isidore, the first Franciscan college, which was founded in Rome thanks to Luke Wadding, was a very important and prominent philosophical and theological center. So which is another thing to keep in mind. And the third section, which is the last, which I think it was interesting to include, was the relation between Wadding and Ireland. So how much Wadding, despite being a man who left Ireland when he was very young, he was keeping contact, how much he did for his country, how much was his relation, how they changed over the course of the year. And that's, I think, what was the part most interesting, not just for me, but for all the authors. So basically, how do we gauge his legacy? And I think another point was trying to balance, how much, we did with the sources, because we have a lot of material which comes from Rome, but also a lot of material which comes from the Spanish archives and also from the archives in France. So the question is how much, which kind of sources we upset, which kind of sources we have to exclude. And as also another important was also, which is quite new to this book, is the role of Wadding as art patron. There is an interesting chapter written by Giulia Spoltore, in which she analyzes the role of Wadding as an art collector. So basically, he was able to invite all the most prominent artists in Baroque Rome to come to paint and work for the St. Isidore College. So this was a new aspect which was investigated. Another thing which I think was important to keep in mind was the diplomatic relation. So how much Wadding was instrumental in providing help to the Irish Catholics, how much he was able to portray and establish an Irish presence in Rome, because we have to see that Wadding was very important in really creating an Irish identity in the city. Just think how Rome was in the 17th century, a city which is populated by many foreigners, but in which before his arrival, nothing was really much about Ireland. And the Irish were sort of a small community with no influential figure. So I think that was another interesting aspect of the book, which came out, I hope, in trying to see that Wadding basically he was the man who took Ireland to Rome and he portrayed Ireland to the Pope and trying to highlight the problems. So the Anglican conquest, the religious persecution, the problem of the religious exile, like the people like Wadding, Catholic, had to flee the Ireland because they could be killed. So that was another thing. So I think overall that's more or less what can I say about my introduction to the book, and I'm open to question.
Okay, thank you very much for this important insight. I would like first ask Pedro to tell us, why do you believe that this book aligns with the theme of the Iberian connections, with the Routledge special collections on Iberian connections? And we would also appreciate hearing your thoughts on what sets this book apart from others in terms of its uniqueness and value.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Can you hear me well? Does it sound okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a pleasure to be here and discussing a book that I really consider that is a remarkable achievement. It's Matteo Binasco has put together a collection of works that really pay justice to the figure of Luke Wadding and his multifaceted trajectory. The book is definitely a work, a piece of scholarship that is perfect for this collection because, as Matteo has just mentioned, the trajectory of this man, Luke Wadding, this Irishman, is very closely connected, or more than connected, is part of the history of the Iberian world, the Spanish monarchy, of which Portugal was part of during the time Luke Wadding passed in Portugal and then spent time in Spain, and then most of his life in Rome. So Luke Wadding, it can be said, is part of the history of the Spanish monarchy, is part of the history of Portugal as countries, as populations that were part of this multifaceted ensemble of peoples and cultures that we usually call the Catholic world during the early modern period. And the way the book is organized, I think it makes it very, very clear these very strong connections with the Iberian world, but also connections with the world outside the Iberian world. I think one of the many merits of this book is the fact that apart from going really in depth in the analysis of a series of dimensions, it also considers the Iberian world in its connections, in its interactions with other contexts in Europe, mostly in Northern Europe and the Atlantic archipelago. And so it's not exactly a book that focuses on the Iberian world and that's it. And it considers this world in all its complexity. It's a multifaceted world, what we call the Iberian world, and it's also clear when reading this book that it is impossible to understand the fundamental aspects of the Iberian worlds without taking into consideration the many interactions it had with countries, peoples, cultures that were not part of that world. In the case of this collective volume, it is clear that that Ireland and also England and Scotland, but above all England, are more or less present in many dimensions that are focused by the volume. But it's also clear that studying Luke Wadding's trajectory and actions show the many connections that this man and this life managed to establish with different milieus across early modern Europe, in particular the first half of the 17th century. I could add some concrete examples of the topics where this connected character is particularly visible. Not just connecting developments taking place inside the context that are under analysis, but also how these developments are closely in interaction with other parts of Europe. For instance, the pages devoted to plantations and anti-Catholic measures in Ireland, I think it's very clear, but also how this volume also deals with the history of the Franciscan province of Ireland. The last chapter, or to be more precise, the last section, the fourth section of the volume, on the connections between Wadding and Ireland, I find this section particularly interesting and innovative. The way it addresses the role of Wadding in developing a sense of Irish identity in the Roman context. By more or less the same time the Cromwellian invasion was taking place and the subsequent conquest of Ireland. So it's a volume that always tries to see these processes and developments taking place in a kind of an entangled manner. So it shows in a very clear way that you cannot understand in an in-depth way the decisions made by Wadding while in Rome without taking into consideration developments taking place in other parts of Europe. So his life is multifaceted, extremely rich, and the many possibilities that his trajectory offers are really very well studied in this volume. As Matteo at a certain point mentions in his really insightful introduction, you need a multidisciplinary team to account for all the dimensions of Luke Wadding's life, because it's so rich, so complex, so diverse, that you need people with different kinds of expertise, different fields of specialization, different kinds of approaches, both in theoretical and methodological terms. So it's very demanding, but also very rich. And as I said a while ago, this is a volume that really manages and successfully accounts for the complexity and richness of Luke Wadding's life and trajectory.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for your comments. Now we could come maybe to two rounds of questions. So for sure, Pedro and I, we have different questions. So maybe I will start with my first questions, my 3 questions that I have for you after this very interesting reading of this book. And then please also answer. And then Pedro, for sure, will have more questions to you. And my questions are because I was very interested also in this context of global history. So I would like you to characterize what is global history based on the insights of from your book. Do you think that we can equate global with well-connected? And can isolated individuals make a significant contribution to global history? My second question is about the networks. I'm very interested in the networking and the network studies. Because in your book, you highlighted several elements that shape religious networks, including patronage relationships, trust, prestige, strategy, loyalty, and reputation. And to what extent do these elements shape these religious networks, and why do you think they are particularly important? And my third question is about the methodology, actually, of biographical writing, because your book makes a great contribution to how to write the biography and offers also a very fresh approach that departs from the traditional chronological order. And by addressing various aspects ranging from geographical locations such as Iberian Peninsula, Rome, Ireland, also to thematic areas such as early modern migration, culture, and religion, you present an alternative way and compelling way of writing biography. And how do you think, do you believe that this approach of writing and compelling biography somehow surpass the conventional reliance on chronological sequencing? So this were my questions. So maybe now you can also answer our first round of questions, and then also more questions from Pedro.
Absolutely. Thank you, Agatha, and thank you also, Pedro. Very nice introduction for your very nice remark. So coming to your first question, I would say that, it's quite, when you think about global history and connected history, if you look at Wadding as his personal career, born in Ireland, spent part of his life in the Iberian Peninsula, and then went to Rome, where he became a very important man, not just for Ireland but for all the Catholic Europe. And if you look at his correspondence, especially when he was collecting information about, when he was working on the Annales Minores, you see that this man, he was being based in Rome, he was receiving information from his confrere acting in South America, his confrere in Asia, his confrere in Central America, his confrere, the Franciscan active in Northern Europe. So basically, you see one man, without moving from Rome, he was able to collect, details about what was going on, not just, about missionary activity, but also about, political situation. So I think with this is looking at his letters, his correspondence, you can see really behind like 2 different levels, global history in the sense that he was receiving information also beyond Europe, and also connected history in the sense that he was trying to connect different people based in different countries, which he would never have a chance to meet, himself. So basically, I think that was one of his legacy. And I think looking at his activity as a scholarly author, his capacity to write such an outstanding volume like the Annales Minorum, you can really see that he was able to apply this perspective, to have a sort of global outlook of Catholicism, what was going on, not just in Ireland, but in the Iberian Peninsula, in South America, in Central America, which is quite interesting. And it's quite remarkable from a single man, who basically, he was doing all this work by himself. Second question, if I remember, what was about the element of patronage and the network. I think, I applied a theory which in the Roman Curia is quite, if you're working on the archives of the Roman Curia, is essential, because especially for the 16th and 17th century, you see that this was Rome became a very complex, mechanism of different, dicasteries and different members who were interacting with each other. So basically, Wadding was able to navigate in this rough sea by applying a sort of connection, personal connection. So basically, you see like element of patronage. Just you have to remember that Wadding, he was able to get money from the Barberini, the most famous cardinal in 17th Rome, but also to establish their personal connection with the Pope, with the Spanish ambassador. So I think this network theory is essential to understand a man who have to live in a very complex context in which you have to be very careful about what you are doing and what you are writing, and about also what you are requesting. So I think this element of patronage, I hope it comes out quite clear in the chapters of the book, because Wadding achieved to become what he became, basically also through a personal, links with prominent figures, cardinal, kings, and I just think that he came to Rome as a personal theologian of a Spanish embassy. So that means he was able to develop a keen relation with a prominent political authority. So I think this network, this theory of patronage and network can apply to Wadding in a very easy way, because it comes up very quickly when you look at his correspondence. The last question, when you were speaking about if I try to, I think when we're thinking about, we were discussing a lot with a group of scholars about how to develop the scheme of a book, how to prepare the table of contents, how to divide the books, if we were to follow a chronological part, if we were to follow like a thematic section. I think when you write a biography of such a complex man in which nobody before has been tried to do, or at least they failed, I think our approach, not just my approach, because it's something that I've been speaking a lot with all the authors, is, I suppose, basically maybe the only way, or not just the only way, but I think it's very suitable, because basically you have to think that writing chronologically to such a man in which he moved between so many different parts, in which he had so many roles, in which he was able to, contribute to so many things, college founder, diplomat, patron of art, and politician, let's say, like between brackets. And this really, I think, what we try to achieve using this kind of methodology was the only way, according to my modest opinion, to understand and assess Wadding figure and legacy. So I hope to have answered to all your questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then to the second round, please, Pedro.
Thank you, Agatha and Matteo. I after reading the volume you've edited, Matteo, my impression is that it's an extremely rich example or showcase of historiography, because you have a variety of genres there and approaches that are quite different, basically because of the reasons we have already talked about. The fact that Wadding's trajectory was so rich and multifaceted that you need to put together a team of people with different backgrounds and expertise. But in terms of their approaches, it's also visible a variety of strategies and decisions that were made. For instance, you have different scales being applied to different moments of Wadding's life and actions. It's clear, I agree with you, that there's an element of global here particularly visible in the awareness that Wadding and many of those who surrounded him had about the global reach of the Catholic Church, and that the decisions that they were making, they had an impact not just in Rome or Western Europe, but in extremely vast areas of the globe. So I would say that the global dimension of the volume, or at least one of the global dimensions, has to do precisely with this awareness of the enormous size of and reach of this Catholic world, but also the entangled character of the developments and the decisions that they were making. They were making decisions that had an impact on a variety of places, and were also shaped by inputs coming from different places. In that sense, another aspect that I think it's important to underscore in this volume is the fact that its many chapters, they are an excellent example of what we could term perhaps a transnational approach, or to put in another way, many chapters of this volume show that approaching Wadding, a figure like Wadding, from a national point of view is not enough. It's not fruitful, because you end up missing a lot of things that are and the very aspect of his identity, and you've mentioned it already, and it's present in many pages of your volume. It's an issue. It's a problem. How to classify Wadding in terms of identity? Okay, we can say he's an Irishman, no doubt about it, from the place where he was born, and for many of the actions and decisions he made throughout his life. But at the same time, is very much into the Portuguese and above all the Spanish intellectual milieu, and then the cultural and intellectual landscape of Rome is clearly part of it. And but at the same time, he shows that he lives in a period where it was not necessarily a problem to have many identities and a variety of senses of belonging, and for a person for a man like Luke Wadding, it was not at all a problem to be intensely Irish, and at the same time see his Catholic identity as something that was really fundamental. Not to mention his loyalty to the Spanish monarchy. Several chapters of the book underscore many aspects of his life, and how loyal he demonstrated to be to the monarchs of Spain and the rulers of the Spanish monarchy. So do you agree with this way of reading the volume and interpreting Wadding's trajectory?
I totally agree, Pedro. Thank you very much. I think, it's such a fascinating character. So basically, you're also dealing with a theme of religious exile in 17 Europe, which was a sort of very complex place in which the question of national identities could change, and also a question of religious migrants. They move to one place like Spain, just think about how many Irish people went to Spain, but also when he moved to Italy, he had to adapt to a new concept. So I think, the question of identity, and also how much he was changing, how much he was influenced by this context, it's really something that come up. And I hope, the book makes it clear that, we need to frame Wadding within the context of the 17th century, not just Rome, where he spent the majority of his life, but Catholic Europe or Catholic world. So I think, using a national lens, like he was just an Irishman, or he was just a simple Spanishman, or an Irishman who became Hispanized or Romanized, cannot be applied. I think his identity was very fluid. He kept on changing. He was definitely an Irishman. And if you go to St. Isidore's, you could understand that he was really trying to promote Ireland to Rome. But at the same time, once again, if you look at his correspondence, he was extremely global, because he was making contact with people in Ireland, people in Spain, people in Ireland, people in France, people in Prague, people in South America, so in Portugal. So that gives an indication of man who was trying to think globally. for we had not the same, the possibility as we have today to travel. But at the same time, he was trying to have a sort of clear global vision of what was going on in the world.
I totally agree. And also, another aspect that I would like to underline in the volume is that you see Wadding operating with different scales, and not just the local and the global, but in between many scales. I mean, he can think of his Irish hometown, but then at the same time, while working at the Propaganda Fide, he knows that he's making decisions that have an impact on many areas of the world, different continents, also Asia, of course. But in between, he also sees the many territories that are part of the Spanish monarchy in Europe, and the countries and kingdoms and republics that are not part of the Spanish monarchy, and where Propaganda Fide is also operating. So it's we could think of or portray him as a multi-scalar man, because he manages to be aware of not just things at the local level in Ireland or in the region where he was born, but also the kind of a global reach of his decisions, and in between the many territories he is dealing with during, above all, the time he was operating in Rome. The volume is, as I said, an excellent showcase of different historiographic genres. For those who haven't read the book, I take this opportunity to make a little bit of advertisement and say that you have many pages of political history, diplomatic history, network analysis, combined with theology, connections between men of letters, Republic of Letters. You also see, you'll also have the chance to find really interesting and insightful analysis of theological matters, but and showing that theology was, of course, a highly sophisticated field of knowledge, but also with very concrete implications in the day-to-day life and politics of that period. And so that's another thing that I'd like to underscore. And one of the aspects that is also very much present in the book is the role that Wadding played in the debate about the Immaculate Conception, and think of this topic as a quintessential Spanish topic. So here he is, an Irishman dealing and fighting for the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. The same man that afterwards will also stress the importance of St. Patrick's as a saint, a patron saint for Ireland. So it's a fascinating volume about a multifaceted and equally fascinating figure. And as I said, these various chapters, they end up exploring these various dimensions in many different ways. And I think, Matteo, the thing that you've managed to do is to build a coherent volume. So we could have a collective volume with each chapter pointing into different directions, but it's not the case. It's diverse, it's varied, it's very rich, but there is a coherence in the volume, and I think it's also an aspect that has to be underscored. And this variety of historiographic genres, you have cultural history, you have pages devoted to the patronage and visual arts of Luke Wadding, his role as chief chronicler of the Franciscan order, the role he played in the Congregation of the Index or in the Sacred Congregation of the Propaganda Fide, the controversy with the Jesuits. It's another aspect that is important, and it's very much present in this volume. So, contrarily to the mainstream of the scholarly literature about this period, mostly devoted to the Jesuits, this is a volume about Franciscans and Franciscan order, Duns Scotus, and the importance of Scotus in the intellectual life of early modern Catholic Europe. So that's another dimension that I'd like to underscore. Last but not least, the volume shows through the lens of Wadding what Simon Ditchfeld called Rome as a global hub of the Catholic world. So the many aspects studied about the life and works of Luke Wadding really show in very concrete terms what Ditchfeld called the Rome as a global hub of the Catholic world. So would you like to comment? It's not really a question, but it's more like reacting to the richness of your volume.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Pedro. I think the question was when we try to organize the book and while we're writing on the chapter, we have like many meetings between the authors, and the question was to be how we are going to gather all of them. I think one of the problems was to deal with a different historiography. In the case of, for example, the Irish historiography, you see a man which has been quite forgotten. And, we say there is, the majority of the articles were written by Franciscan historians, which were quite excellent piece of work. But at the same time, there was this kind of influence by this strong geography. And I think what also, Pedro said before, if you look at about the books about, the religious orders in the 16th, 17th century, also 18th century, but specifically in the 17th century, we have a huge amount of works done on the Jesuit, just we are dealing about thousands of books, which is a historiography which keeps on evolving. I don't know how many of them have been published. On the contrast, if you look at not just the Irish Franciscan, on the Luke Wadding, but it's sort of especially for the Franciscan in Italy, once again, you see very good jobs being done, very good analysis, but at the same time, they don't reach the scholarly level made on the Jesuit. So I think, we tried also to bring not just Luke Wadding, but also to bring the Franciscan order into the main context of global Catholicism. And how much, he was influential, not just for the Irish Franciscan province, but basically for the Franciscan order. So how the Franciscans were actually living and experiencing the 17th century. I mean, of course, there are many, many other important Franciscans active in the Spanish world, or especially in the Portuguese world, in the Portuguese Empire. But I think Wadding could be a sort of crossroad in, bridging what is could be the North Atlantic world and the Central America Atlantic world. So being a man who was, born in Ireland, who first went to the Iberian Peninsula, he was exposed to the Catholic Orthodoxy in Spanish Peninsula, in the Iberian Peninsula, and then went to the hub as Simon Ditchfield of Catholic, Catholicism, which was Rome. So I think it's a good combination, and I think we tried also to keep that in mind, that the Franciscan, not just the Irish Franciscan, have to be also an important element that had to come up from the book.
Thank you very much, Matteo, for your comments. I think, unfortunately, we have to come to end of to this discussion. But before Pedro will make his final remarks, I also would like to invite to find the book on the Routledge Special Collection. Also, you can find us on Facebook and on our website, Iberian Connection. So please feel free also to read the last post of Matteo about the book, and also please find his book in Routledge. So yeah, final words and final remarks to Pedro, and we will be finishing.
Okay, thank you. I got to. Well, I've spoken a lot already. What I would add to what I've just said would be, well, apart from insisting on this focus on the Franciscan intellectual and cultural world and the importance of Duns Scotus in 17th century intellectual Catholic milieu, I would like to stress a final aspect of this volume is which I've already in a certain way have already mentioned, is its capacity to establish a dialogue, putting bring into a conversation, a common conversation, different historiographies coming from these different national traditions, and the volume does it in a very interesting way, and shows the importance of these approaches that go beyond the national framework of analysis and manage to build a bridge between different scholarly communities. The Irish, I think that this is a book that will be of interest of many English historians or historians who work on early modern England. I hope this volume has many readers in this context, but it's also obviously a book of interest of all those studying the Spanish monarchy, early modern Portugal too, because Portugal was part of this world. It's a book that speaks of a geography that it's not completely obvious, as seen from the nowadays world. So it's not that obvious, this trajectory from Ireland to Matosinhos and then to Spain, Salamanca and other places in Spain, and then Rome. It's a different geography, different taking into account present day world and how we see this circulation of people. And like I said, the achievement of this book is to present a very coherent image of this multifaceted trajectory, and establishing a dialogue between different scholarly traditions, a very fruitful one. And I hope this is just the first stage of a further research into other figures who have similar trajectories across the Spanish monarchy, the Catholic world in the early modern period. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Thank you, Matteo, for your participation. Thank you, Pedro, for your comments. And also we would like to thank to Igor, who is behind the scene, the stage, taking care of the administrative and technological things. So thank you very much, and thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you.
Present and to
thank you. Thank you, Matteo.
Thank you. Thank you, Pedro. Thank you, Gagata. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.